Zillennials have found a way to feel wealthy for exactly 48 hours. It shows up the moment a paycheck lands, and it disappears right on schedule, 3 days later, like it was never there. This isn't bad math. It's a psychological pattern with a stopwatch. Call it payday amnesia. For a short window after money hits the account, the brain treats a fixed number like unlimited potential. Every constraint from 4 days ago goes quiet. Rent is still due. The balance on the credit card hasn't moved, but the part of the brain that tracks that stops reporting for duty. Take Marcus, 27, works logistics. Payday hits Friday morning. By Friday night, he's ordered sushi, bought concert tickets, and tipped an Uber driver 40%. Monday, he's recalculating whether he can afford groceries before the next check clears. This isn't a personal failing. It's a documented generational pattern. According to Goldman Sachs' 2025 retirement survey, 42% of Gen Z and millennial workers report living paycheck to paycheck. That number alone explains scarcity. It doesn't explain the euphoria part. The euphoria is the interesting half. Bank of America's 2026 Better Money Habits report found that 92% of Gen Z treat themselves to something, at least occasionally. More than half do it weekly. That's not indulgence running wild. That's a coping mechanism with a receipt attached. Almost everyone is doing it, which is worth pausing on. A behavior this common isn't a personality trait. It's a response to a shared condition. Here's the mechanism. When income has felt unstable for years, the brain stops trusting future money to show up, so it front-loads the reward. Spend now, while the number is confirmed and real, because later has failed to deliver before. The payday high isn't recklessness. It's a rational response to an irrational amount of financial uncertainty. Behavioral economists have a name for a version of this: hyperbolic discounting. A reward available right now gets weighted far more heavily than an identical reward available later, even when later is only a few days out. Under normal conditions, that bias is mild. Under chronic instability, it gets amplified, because later has personally, repeatedly, let the brain down before. The math isn't broken. The trust in the timeline is. There's also a confirmation problem built into how a paycheck actually appears. It shows up as one clean number, not this much for rent, this much for the loan, this much left over, just a total. A total, by design, looks like abundance, even when 90% of it is already spoken for. The brain reacts to what it sees first. What it sees first is a big number with no labels attached yet. The 3-day window isn't random either. It roughly matches how long it takes recurring bills to actually clear. Rent auto drafts, a subscription renews, a minimum payment posts. Each one removes a chunk from that unlabeled total and turns it back into a labeled one. The euphoria doesn't fade because the mood changes. It fades because the number keeps getting smaller in front of the person watching it. Same pattern shows up in health spending. Sarah, 29, renews a boutique fitness membership every payday, then mentally cancels it by day 4, 3 months running. The subscription isn't about fitness. It's a receipt that says today mattered. It shows up in career decisions too. David, 31, browses job listings only on payday, feeling briefly unstoppable enough to consider quitting without a backup plan. By Tuesday, the tab is closed. The confidence was rented, not owned, and it shows up in relationships. Priya, 26, picks up the whole dinner bill on payday, insists everyone order dessert. A week later, she's declining plans, citing saving up. The generosity and the disappearance are the same cycle, just running on 2 different days. The data backs up how fast the crash arrives. A Vanquish survey found millennials aged 25 to 34 make an average of 71 impulse purchases a year. That's roughly 1 every 5 days, almost exactly the length of the euphoria window itself. And the aftermath isn't neutral. A Retail Brew survey from earlier this year found 62% of consumers regretted an impulse purchase, and 34% said it caused actual financial stress. This isn't people spending without noticing. They notice. They just notice on a delay. That delay is the whole trick. In the moment, spending doesn't feel like spending. It feels like relief. Relief from months of checking an account balance before ordering coffee. Relief from constantly running a mental spreadsheet just to buy groceries. For 48 hours, that spreadsheet closes. Then it reopens. Not because anyone did anything wrong, but because the money was never actually surplus. It was rent money and grocery money, temporarily wearing a costume that said, extra bad credit. Org's 2025 research found 48% of millennials and 42% of Gen Z say they carry more financial regret than older generations do. Not because they spend more recklessly in absolute terms. Older generations had stable enough income to plan around. This generation is planning around income that behaves unpredictably, so the plan keeps collapsing on a 3-day cycle instead of a monthly one. There's a second layer worth naming. Social comparison speeds up the crash. Watching other people's spending in real time, all day, on a 5-inch screen, makes the euphoria window feel smaller than it is. It's harder to sit in "I have money right now" when a feed is constantly narrating what other people are doing with theirs. So the guilt shows up fast, and it shows up specific. Not "I spent money." More like "I spent it on the wrong thing, at the wrong time, while everyone was watching." BOFA's data backs this too. 41% of Gen Z report financial guilt at least once a week. That's not an occasional gut punch. That's a weekly appointment. There's a related habit that stretches the high a little longer. Buy now, pay later. It lets someone spend money they don't currently have while feeling like they're still inside the payday window because no lump sum leaves the account yet. It's the same 48-hour feeling, financed forward into weeks that haven't happened. The crash still arrives. It just arrives with interest attached, and on a delay long enough to make the connection to the original payday harder to notice. Older generations didn't build this exact cycle, and it's not because they had more self-control. They had a more predictable relationship between effort and outcome. Work a set number of years. Income moves in a fairly straight line. Savings compound quietly in the background. That predictability let the brain relax around money instead of treating every payday like a small, temporary emergency worth celebrating. Remove the predictability, and the celebration becomes a coping strategy instead of a luxury. It also explains why budgeting apps alone don't fix this. A tracking app can show someone exactly where the 71 impulse purchases went. It cannot restore the underlying belief that stability is coming. Data corrects arithmetic. It doesn't correct trust. And this entire pattern is downstream of trust, not downstream of math skills. What's actually happening is a trust problem, not a discipline problem. The euphoric self and the anxious self aren't different people with different values. They're the same person, operating on different information, 3 days apart. One version has just seen the number confirmed. The other version has watched it shrink every day since. Marcus doesn't forget he has rent due. He knows the math the entire time. What changes is which version of himself gets permission to spend. Friday night Marcus trusts the number in the account. Monday Marcus trusts the bills waiting behind it. Neither one is lying to the other. They're just taking turns holding the wallet. That's the part worth sitting with. This isn't a generation that can't budget. It's a generation that learned, correctly, that stability isn't guaranteed month to month, so it stopped waiting for stability to feel safe. It borrows the feeling in 48-hour installments instead. The high isn't the problem. The high is the evidence that something underneath it never got fixed. Calling it irresponsible misses what's actually being solved for. A person who has never once, in their working life, felt fully caught up isn't chasing thrills when the paycheck lands. They're claiming the only 48 hours where the math briefly works in their favor. That's not a character flaw showing up on a schedule. That's a coping strategy showing up on a schedule, and coping strategies only look irrational from outside the situation they're coping with. The fix, if there is one, probably isn't a better spreadsheet. It's whatever it takes to make later trustworthy again, so the brain stops needing to spend the good news the moment it arrives. If any of this landed, there's more of this on the channel.